On this example is called the blanket stitch. You're going to use a needle that's been threaded. You'll see the short side over here, and then on the long side you have a knot which will be fastened into the fabric on the wrong side. So the first thing you're going to do is go through your cloth, come up from the wrong underside, the wrong side, pull it through, making sure that that knot comes up right next to the cloth, and then you're going to make a stitch. The needle's going to go down in the same spot. This is just for the first stitch, and then come up through the circle, and that's going to secure you. That's going to be your starting stitch. You've got 2 lines of thread there, but that's fine. Then you're going to go from underneath the wrong side, bring your needle up. See that loop that's standing up there that's coming right out of that stitch? Your needle's going to go into that loop, and your stitch is going to end up on the edge of the cloth. You don't want to pull it too tightly, because then you'll have the angle stitch that you see I had, because it should be a very boxy looking stitch. So again, we're going to come up from the wrong side for the next stitch, pull it through the cloth, and that loop that's here, that's where we're going to go into it, and then draw it down. Now remember, all this has to be tight on the wrong side. Your knot is tight to the cloth, these stitches are tight to the cloth. That's what you want to happen. Come from the underside. These stitches are about 1/4 of an inch apart and 1/4 of an inch from your finished edge. We're going to make sure that that loop is there from the previous stitch. You're just going to go under it, and as you draw it up, you get that nice boxy looking stitch. Go from the underside, come up, and that loop is there. You're going to go into the loop, pull it down next to the cloth. Now when you're ready to stop and put an ending knot, you're going to have to fasten it off because it's up here on the top edge. So for this, you're going to go from the top side into the very same stitch that you made last, and just pull it straight down, and that will keep it up there on the top. And then go to the opposite side, take a stitch in the base, and do the same finishing knot we've shown you before, and that is that your thread is going to go into that loop 1 or 2 times and draw it down next to the cloth, and then leave about a 1/2 inch tail when you cut it off. So the beginning and the ending knot are on the wrong side. All of your stitches are even, 1/4 of an inch into the cloth and 1/4 of an inch apart, and now you have an example of a blanket stitch.
Show more effort if you give me a chance.
Nice. Are you willing to work as part of a team?
The stitch we're going to be talking about in this episode is going to be the blanket stitch, and you see an example of it right here. The blanket stitch is going to look the same on the front as it does on the back. Your knots are going to be on the back, and I will show you how to do it. You have your needle that's been threaded, you have the short tail, you have the long tail, and of course there's a knot at the end of it to stop it from coming through your fabric. So we're going to pick up the needle and go from the underside and pull the thread up close so that the knot is secured in the fabric. Then we're going to take 1 stitch coming from the underside and going into that loop so that, start over. The stitch we're going to be talking about today, and I'm going to demonstrate for you, is called the blanket stitch. And here's an example of the blanket stitch on the edge of this piece of cloth. It is an edge finish, as you can see. The stitches are about 1/4 of an inch apart, and I will show you how to begin and how to end. You will need a needle that's been threaded already. You have the short tail and you have the long tail, and the long tail has a knot at the end of it, so it will stop the thread from pulling through your fabric. So we're going to take 1 stitch coming up from the back side of the cloth and pulling it through. You can see that the knot is secure right next to the cloth. Then we're going to start with a loop. Okay, let me show you that loop. Here's the loop for the first stitch, And your needle is going to come from the underside and come up right in that loop. Now you just do this for the first stitch so that you can secure your thread on the edge. Again, we pulled it right up tight next to the edge. Now the next stitches are going to come 1/4 of an inch apart. Let me hold it over here on the left hand side. You're going to come up from that, and then this loop that's here from that previous stitch, you're going to put the needle into that loop and draw it down next to the edge of the cloth. And this is the process you'll keep repeating. The needle comes up from the back, and when it comes up, you're going to put it into the loop that's coming from the previous stitch, and then draw it down next to the cloth. Again, you're going to come from the underside, about 1/4 of an inch down from the edge, and 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the fabric, and then the thread that's coming off from the previous stitch, that's what you're going to put your needle under, and then pull. So let me do several of these without moving my hand so much. Your left hand is going to hold the fabric still. You're going to go into that loop, which is coming off the other stitch, you can see that, and draw it down next to the cloth. Come in from the back side, there's the loop, put your needle into the loop, draw it next to the cloth. Now when you're ready to end, you're going to take your needle and go from the front side to the back side so you can secure that stitch up on the top. You'll notice that your beginning loop and your ending loop seem to have a double thread. Now we're going to turn the cloth over. You see that both sides look exactly alike. This is my beginning knot. On this side, I can take a small stitch of thread of the fabric, right where the sewing was, put my needle into that loop once and twice. This is the same knot that we've showed you before. And then when you draw it down next to the fabric, it is tight and it's made a good knot. You cut your thread about 1/2 inch away from the edge, and now you have a blanket stitch on the edge of your fabric.